We may be looking at the beginnings of World War III. It's been said by many people much more informed and smarter than I. There have been statements from powerful, prominent individuals that World War III has already begun, and we just wouldn't know it. The big breaking news: China to send troops to Russia for joint military exercise. Now they're claiming it's unrelated to the current international and regional situation. But I call BS. It's not just Russia. It's also Belarus. It's Mongolia, it's India, it's Tajikistan, it's other countries. But Belarusian involvement says to me very much so the war in Ukraine. We've heard that there's a military operation in Crimea, a major escalation of the war, with NATO and the U.S. bankrolling this. Joe Biden delivering billions of dollars to the Ukrainians. You think Russia thinks it's just them versus Ukraine? No, they've been saying that it's World War III. They've been saying, their propagandists at least, that this is Russia versus NATO. And now there's Taiwan. There's so much big news here. Often we get wrapped up in domestic policy issues. I know we're all excited about Liz Cheney getting defeated in her primary, but there are very powerful worldly affairs at play. A second congressional delegation went to Taiwan, which is insane. It was bad enough when Nancy Pelosi went there. I can respect her, going. It's brave. And China does not dictate where we send politicians, but was it necessary? China responded with military drills, firing missiles over Taiwan, apparently some of which landed in Japan's territorial waters, which some could argue is an act of war. But nobody wants war. As much as people may be preparing for it, the reality is nobody really wants it except the Bowyers, the weapons manufacturers, those who would make the arms and sell them. They profit off the war. And so they're probably gearing up and excited. They can probably sell weapons in all directions. We'll see. As China's preparing for this military operation, there's a very real threat that they'll move in to take Taiwan. The U.S. will have some resistance, but war ultimately will break out if the U.S. cannot protect Taiwan. And I'm not entirely sure it should or could, but if it doesn't, then what's to stop China from expanding in the South China Sea, oppressing Vietnam, Japan, and other countries? Japan's already been gearing up for war as well. Now, we looked at China, and we look at the military operations as if that's the sign, but it's not. It's a signal that something may be coming, but the signs, the real evidence that war may be coming. There's a drought. There's a potential food shortage. There is a food shortage, I should say. There's power outages, rolling blackouts, a housing crisis. China's economy is in dire straits, and desperation can lead to war. Now, over in the U.S., there's something similar. We have an economic crisis, but we're, fairly fat and happy. We also have a housing crisis. We have economic problems. But if you were to compare the two countries, it looks like China's substantially worse. Right now, there's a mortgage boycott. Citizens are refusing to pay their bills. And there is a food shortage and a drought. Now, you can talk about the U.S. engaging in surreptitious methods to damage an economy to try and win a Cold War. I don't think the U.S. has the capabilities to make a drought happen, as much as many people might want to believe that's the case. Now, I really don't believe it. We may be looking here in the United States at a civil war, or maybe not. Maybe what happens is that come the 2022 midterms, I should say the November midterms in less than 3 months, Republicans win. There's accountability for the uniparty. Donald Trump comes in 2024, and the U.S. is saved from the worst possible outcome, civil war. But regardless of what happens, it seems like war with China is gradually becoming a reality. And hopefully it doesn't. But they are preparing for this. Taiwan is responding. Fears of World War III are escalating. And China is warning the U.S. to get their military out of their waters, what they believe are their waters. I don't know how much longer this can go on, but it does not look, with the way things are going economically, that there will be de-escalation. I want to read this story. But before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member to help support our work. As a member, you'll get access to all of our shows, like the Timcast IRL Uncensored After Hours show. And we just launched the new Cast Castle weekly show with special guest Jack Posobiec, who engaged in a very comedic bit, which is very funny. You guys are going to enjoy it. I'm not going to pretend like our production quality is like Hollywood level stuff. We're just getting the ball rolling. My motto is just start doing it. And that's what we're doing here with the Newcastle Castle show. It is behind the scenes. It is a tour of the house, but we throw in jokes and we make it fun. So I think you guys will like it. And we also have Tales from the Inverted World, Pop Culture Crisis, all that really great stuff. Smash that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Share the show with your friends. And let me start by reading this headline. From NBC News, China to send troops to Russia for joint military exercise. Beijing's participation in the joint exercise was, quote, unrelated to the current international and regional situation, the country's defense ministry said in a statement. Though I really don't believe it. They can say what they want. Now, before I read this, I want to give a separate shout out to Kurtzgesaget. Yes, that's the YouTube channel. Kurtzgesaget. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Nearly 20 million subscribers. On August 16th, they published a video, which is number 4 on trending on YouTube, Is Civilization on the Brink of Collapse? And a lot of people are sharing this, just pointing out that timing, I guess. But the timing makes sense. There's a reason why it has 4 million views overnight. I mean, take a look at this. It's because everybody's thinking about it. Because there is concern about World War III, nuclear war, or even civil war. Now, they mentioned in the video, even in the worst collapses of, say, the Roman Empire and other empires, only about 10% of the population died. But you need to think about what that means. If we're talking about a global war, this would be 800 million people dying. If it's a civil war, we're talking about 30 million people dying. Okay, let's be fair. Let's say 20 million. Maybe I don't want to exaggerate. These would still be very devastating times. NBC News reports Chinese troops will travel to Russia to take part in joint military exercises led by the host, and including India, Belarus, Mongolia, Tajikistan, and other countries, China's defense ministry said on Wednesday. China's participation in the joint exercises was unrelated to the current situation. Last month, Moscow announced plans to hold Vostok East exercises from August 30th to September 5th, even as it wages a costly war in Ukraine. It said at the time that some foreign forces would participate without naming them. Its last such exercise took place in 2018 when China took part for the first time. China's defense ministry said its participation in the exercises was part of an ongoing bilateral annual cooperation agreement with Russia. The aim is to deepen practical and friendly cooperation with the armies of participating countries, enhance the level of strategic collaboration among the participating parties, and strengthen the ability to respond to various security threats. Under Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, Beijing and Moscow have grown increasingly close. Now, I will stop here. 2018, they had their first exercise. And many people may be saying, okay, well, look, this isn't about Taiwan or Ukraine. They've been planning this. The crisis in Ukraine has been going on well before even the Euromaidan revolution or ousting of Yanukovych, whatever you want to call it, in Ukraine in 2014. I was actually there for its start. It's crazy to witness. Vladimir Putin has been paying attention to what's been going on for a long time. And it has a lot to do with the Middle East, with Syria and the fall of Syria. And you think that after watching all of these actions, Russia did not talk with China about the increasing potential for hostilities? It's all part of the same system. So they're going to say, on the surface, it's not about Taiwan and Ukraine. The bigger picture? Of course it is. And why do you think they would need to team up with Russia? Because they're at odds with the United States. NBC News goes on to say, China's defense ministry said its participation in the exercise was part of an ongoing bilateral agreement. We read that. Shortly before Russia's February 24th invasion of Ukraine, Beijing and Moscow announced a no-limits partnership. Although U.S. officials say they have not seen China evade U.S.-led sanctions on Russia or provide it with military equipment. Russia's eastern military district includes part of Siberia and has its headquarters in Khabarovsk near the Chinese border. Now, I'm going to pop over to this map here and show you what we got here. This is, I believe, this is Vostok. This is their eastern oblast, I believe. I could be getting it wrong. I'm not an expert on Russian geography. This is where the city of Vladivostok is. Now, I don't know if that is exactly where they're going to be engaging in these operations. It would make sense, sort of, but they also have other borders with China, so maybe more to the north. World War III. Tensions rising, reports The Sun. World War III fears grow as China ramps up military drills near Taiwan. This is from last week. China engaged in military drills, which I would say, which is bringing us to the brink of war, firing these missiles over Taiwan. I mean, it's crazy stuff because any other country doing that, you're declaring war on them. But Taiwan is in this precarious position. Will the U.S. be able to protect them? And I think that was the point of what China was doing. If China was firing missiles over Japan, yeah, there would be some very serious consequences there. What about Taiwan? The Sun reports President Xi Jinping's troops exercises near the contested island were due to end Sunday. But China pledged yesterday to continue its live missile firing and drills involving warships, fighter jets, and troops. The ominous move effectively blockades Taiwan as ships struggle to steer clear of military action in the 100-mile wide strait between the island and the Chinese mainland. This is what you need to understand. China is attacking Taiwan, period. This is not a drill. That's semantics. They are engaged in an attack. I'll use a video game analogy. You ever play like Civilization, Sid Meier's Civilization or anything like that? If you fortify military troops in the territorial region of another nation in the game, you are declaring war. That's how the game works. Okay, it's a video game, not real life. But let's simplify it for you. Even more so. I shouldn't say simplify, but let me just come out and say it. China has effectively blockaded Taiwan from receiving outside resources. If they continue this, food and other resources will deplete in the island nation, weakening the country, making it easier for China to invade. The invasion of China into Taiwan may be nearing, and it may be soon. And when that happens, man, World War III maybe? I don't know. I hate to say it because we've seen regional conflict before. We don't know where it ends, but we've already got war in Eastern Europe. History is condensed when we read it. This could be it. China is cutting off Taiwan from resources, soaking the dishes before washing them, as it were. I'm not trying to diminish the threat here. I'm trying to point out what they're doing is weakening Taiwan. Taiwan responds. Reuters reports Taiwan's Air Force flexes muscles in face of Chinese war games. Yeah, they call it war games, but I think it's crazier than that. They're locking down Taiwan. Reuters says Taiwanese F-16 fighters roared into the night on Wednesday in a show of force in front of the media, demonstrating the military's determination to defend the democratically governed island in the face of days of Chinese war games. China, which claims Taiwan as its territory, has been carrying out military exercises around the island after a visit earlier this month by Pelosi. That was on the 8th. They reported they were extending it. It's now been 9 days, and they are still engaging in these hostilities. From Time, China warns the U.S. against sailing warships through the Taiwan Strait. The rhetoric is there, the actions are there, and then comes the provocation. U.S. congressional delegation arrives in Taiwan in second high-level visit in a month. What do you think is happening? We know what happened when Nancy Pelosi made this move. Another delegation made the same move. I think a statement is being made by these individuals, and whether intentionally or not, by the United States. Nancy Pelosi going there poked the bear, and they said, and we said, the United States, we're going. You can't stop us. China wagged the finger and engaged in these war games. Then the U.S. sends another delegation. So why is China still firing missiles and locking down Taiwan? Well, for one, it is weakening Taiwan, allowing China to gear up for an invasion of the island. Again, potentially triggering World War III or some kind of major international escalation. Or it could be they're responding to this. France 24 reports. The unannounced two-day trip came after Beijing sent warships, missiles, and jets into the waters and skies around Taiwan. The five-member congressional delegation led by Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts was due to hold a meeting with President Tsai Ing-wen on Monday morning following a banquet at the Foreign Ministry. Their visit will focus on trade, regional security, and climate change, Washington's de facto embassy in Taipei said. Taiwan's foreign ministry hailed the visit as another sign of a friendship between Taipei and Washington that is not afraid of China's threats and intimidation. But the bipartisan trip sparked another caustic response from Beijing, which has drawn down its drills but pressed on with military patrols in the Taiwan Strait. State news agency Xinhua published a commentary after the lawmakers' arrival on Sunday with headlines, U.S. politicians should stop playing with fire on Taiwan question. It called the visiting American lawmakers opportunists thinking about their own political interests as November's midterm elections draw near. Those U.S. politicians who are playing with fire on the Taiwan question should drop their wishful thinking. There is no room for compromise or concessions when it comes to China's core interests. Taiwan's government has accused Beijing of using Pelosi's visit as an excuse to kickstart drills that would allow it to rehearse foreign invasion and also barricade the country. That decades-old threat was reiterated in a white paper published last week when China's Taiwan Affairs Office said it would not renounce the use of force against its neighbor and reserve the option of taking all necessary measures. It added, however, we will only be forced to take drastic measures to respond to the provocation of separatist elements or external forces should they ever cross our red lines. Pelosi has stood by her visit, but President Joe Biden said the U.S. military was opposed to the trip by his fellow Democrat, who was second in line to the presidency after the vice president. Congress is constitutionally an equal branch of government, with lawmakers free to travel where they wish, and Taiwan enjoys bipartisan backing in divided Washington. The United States switched diplomatic relations from Taipei to Beijing in 1979, but it remains a key ally of Taiwan and maintains de facto diplomatic relations with Taipei. This is why I think the threat of war is real. You know, we can talk about saber rattling and posturing and all that all day and night, because that happens all the time. But the AP is reporting, as of yesterday, high temperatures and drought in China affect drinking water and crops. When asked about the use of nuclear weapons in the Ukrainian conflict, Russia responded that only if they are facing an existential threat, meaning the end of Russia. Well, that's kind of common sense. To preserve their institutions and control, they will use nuclear weapons. Now, what about China? China is facing an existential threat. Drought, drinking water, housing crisis, high temperatures, power outages. Do you think the CCP will sit back and be like, it's been a good ride, boys, let's call it? Or do you think they're going to say quite simply, come hell or high water, we will not lay down? Do you think the CCP will use any means necessary to survive? That means war. The AP reports unusually high temperatures and a prolonged drought are affecting large swaths of China, reducing crop yields and drinking water supplies. The lack of rain has been especially marked in the southwestern megacity of Chongqing, which encompasses a large area of mountains and rivers. State media on Tuesday reported fire trucks were delivering water to outlying villages for drinking and irrigating crops. Rainfall in Chongqing has been half of what it usually is expected for the year, and some smaller waterways have dried up entirely. Authorities have issued warnings of temperatures exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Many parts of China have broken records for high temperatures this year. Amid the drought, other areas of China have been hit by flash floods, underscoring the effects of climate change on the vast nation of 1.4 billion, stretching from the mountains and deserts of Central Asia to the South China Sea. The Chongqing drought has affected more than 600,000 people and 36,700 hectares, 90,690 acres of crops, the Xinhua news agency reported. Neighboring Hubei province has also been badly hit, with some areas reporting the growing season a complete failure. It's getting scary, yo. Some are saying that the food shortage won't be nearly as bad this fall. The harvest is supposed to be brutal. In the spring, with the war in Russia, a lack of fertilizer exports, we've been looking at a major crop failure. But some have said, look, we do have many crops that persist throughout the year, and we'll probably have enough going into the fall, but it'll be scary. Next year is when it will get really, really bad. I hope not. I hope this is the worst. But China isn't just dealing with food shortages, with a drought. The New York Times reports, as China's economy stumbles, homeowners boycott mortgage payments. In a rare act of defiance, people across the country who bought property from indebted developers are refusing to repay loans on their unfinished apartments. The New York Times says for decades, buying property was considered a safe investment in China. Now, instead of building a foundation of wealth for the country's middle class, real estate has become a source of discontent and anger. In more than 100 cities across China, Hundreds of thousands of Chinese homeowners are banding together and refusing to repay loans on unfinished properties, one of the most widespread acts of public defiance in a country where even minor protests are quelled. The boycotts are part of the fallout from a worsening Chinese economy, slowed by COVID lockdowns, travel restrictions, and wavering confidence in the government. The country's economy is on a path for its slowest growth in decades. Its factories are selling less to the world, and its consumers are spending less at home. On Monday, the government said youth unemployment had reached a record high. Compounding these financial setbacks are the troubles of a particularly vulnerable sector, real estate. Quote, "Life is extremely difficult, and we can no longer afford the monthly mortgage," homeowners in China's central Hunan province wrote in a letter to local officials in July. "We have to take risks out of desperation and follow the path of a mortgage strike." The mortgage rebellions have roiled a property market facing the fallout from a decades-long housing bubble. It has also created unwanted complication for President Xi Jinping, who is expected to coast to a third term as party leader later this year on a message of social stability and continued prosperity in China. So far, the government has scrambled to limit the attention garnered by the boycotts. After an initial flurry of mortgage strike notices went viral on social media, the government's internet censors kicked into action. But the influence of the strikes has already begun to spread. Now, we rag on China a lot. I mean, we as the United States, and there is a lot to rag on them for. The Chinese firewall, the great censors. Yeah, what do you think's happening here in the U.S.? Alex Berenson is preparing a lawsuit against the White House for seeking his censorship on Twitter. And then he was. A clear violation of the First Amendment. Now, I think China is substantially worse than the U.S. I think the U.S. is one of the best countries on the planet. But we've got things to own up for as well. I'm not here to rag on the United States entirely. No, I think we do a pretty good job. I'm here to point out we better do a better job. If we do not do better and defend our freedoms, we will end up no different than the Chinese Communist Party. Uniparty rule. We joke that you've got the establishment, which is neocons and Democrats, but the establishment is faltering. A real opportunity for another party to compete is happening, the MAGA party, within the Republican Party. But the establishment neocon Republican types are losing. Liz Cheney's been defeated. So there is a hope that things turn around here. For China, I'm not so convinced. With a single party, the game they're playing, it ends in the board being flipped over by their own population. They go on to say, the number of properties where collectives of homeowners have started or threatened to boycott has reached 326 nationwide, according to a crowdsourced list titled We Need Home on GitHub, an online repository. ANZ Research estimates that the boycotts could affect about $222 billion of home loans sitting on bank balance sheets, or roughly 4% of outstanding mortgages. Any momentum behind the mortgage strikes would add to a growing number of economic issues facing the Chinese Communist Party. When a rural bank froze withdrawals in Henan province in central China, it set off a violent showdown between depositors and security forces. Recent college graduates are struggling to find work with youth unemployment at 20%. Small businesses, the biggest provider of jobs, are fighting to survive under the constant threat of COVID-19 lockdowns. A viral video recently showed people in an IKEA in China, I think it was IKEA. One person tested positive, so they tried sealing the building, locking everybody in, and they fought their way out. Real estate drives about 1/3 of China's economic activity, by some estimates, and housing accounts for about 70% of household wealth, making it the most important investment for most Chinese people. In 2020, to address concerns about an overheating property market in which homeowners would often buy apartments before they were built, China started to crack down on excessive borrowing by developers. Now, it's similar in the U.S. I don't know to what percentage property and real estate makes up a family's wealth. But the ability to own property and transfer that property to the next generation is how wealth is transferred. And it is where most people have their retirements, their equity, their money, what they have left. Wall Street Journal reporting, China's scorching heat leads to power cuts, factory disruptions. Foxconn, VW, Toyota plants hit in Sichuan. Crop output also affected. Scorching heat leads to power cuts. Not looking good for China, man. As things get worse, their desperation will also continue to get worse. But who am I to judge? Here in the United States, we also have problems. But I bring that up not to say that it's all our fault. I wonder how much of what's happening in China and how much of what is happening here is actually war. Take a look at this from the Daily Mail. Smash and grab. Brazen thieves steal liquor worth thousands of dollars from Los Angeles store, with security standing by idly as looters cause chaos in Democrat-led city, which failed to recall woke DA George Gascon. 2 thieves are caught on video stealing hard liquor from a busy LA grocery store in broad daylight. The video follows the failed attempt to recall the county's progressive district attorney, George Gascon, after recall organizers failed to submit enough valid signatures. They did submit enough signatures. They weren't all valid. A lot of people, once again, are screaming foul play. I will just add this. We need to check the signatures. They came out outright and said, 80,000 are not registered voters. That should be fairly easy to check for anybody. So that should be done. I'm not here to draw conclusions. I'm here to say, keep fighting for the recall if that's what you want. And now verify the verification process of those signatures. Regardless of that, though, the issue is our cities are in chaos. In this video, Dagan McDowell, who works for Fox Business, Fox News, also rescues dogs, wrote on Twitter, "When we come to work at 3 a.m. in New York City, this is what we see, frightening chaos." In this video, you just see people fighting randomly all over the place. It's not the first time we've seen videos like this. So sure, we can keep talking about how bad it is in other countries, but it's bad here too, and we all know it. Fox 5. Manhattan's Chelsea is a neighborhood known for its chic condominiums, greater restaurants, and tolerant community. Now, drug dealers and drug users are overrunning a part of the neighborhood, and residents are paying the price. Open-air drug markets in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. These horrifying videos of kids getting off school buses and seeing drug abuse and people strung out. California, poop in the streets. I wonder if Kurtzka Saget asked the right question. I wonder. Jumping back over to YouTube to show Kurtzka Saget in a nutshell, is civilization on the brink of collapse? I wonder. Now, I got to be honest. They don't actually really address the question. They kind of just talk about what would happen and could it happen, but not if we're on the brink of collapse. I think the issue is, yes, we are. But this video actually is really great and very informative because it talks about what has happened and what could happen. Not if it will right now. But they do entertain the possibility it could. Now, while many people often say that an empire lasts 250 years, as Kurtzka points out, actually societies and civilizations actually last around 300 or so. That even with the fall of the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, I believe, was still in existence. Other empires still existed. Just because one falls doesn't mean everything does. And just because the United States might lose its position and the world may change doesn't mean humanity ceases to exist. But there was the Black Death in Europe. And what ends up happening is really strange, actually. They point out that after the fall of the Roman Empire, people lost the understanding of indoor plumbing. That's amazing. In the Roman Empire, they had certain technologies and infrastructure that was lost. So let me wrap this segment up with a final thought on all of this. You don't want civil war. You don't want societal collapse. You don't want World War III. A lot of people say they do. They're like, bring it on. It's the waiting I can't stand. They talk about the corruption in government. Well, maybe that means it's inevitable. And so I understand the waiting can't stand, but we really have to do everything to prevent this from happening. I don't have the answers. I know that when conflicting ideologies grow, they eventually clash. Thucydides' trap is an interesting concept, that when a growing economic power is on the verge of displacing the dominant power, war tends to break out. But what about cultural ideology? When a growing cultural ideology is on the verge of displacing the dominant ideology, then perhaps civil war breaks out within a country. Or the world if it's ideological. It doesn't have to be economic. And that's where I think the United States is. And that's where I think the world is. If a major catastrophe happens, it would be in line with the Strauss-Howe generational theory, which states that in the next couple of years, we should be looking at a major crisis in the fourth turning. And if that happens, take a look to the Roman Empire to see what happens in the years following. Now, there's a big difference because of our ability to communicate and because of digitized infrastructure knowledge. But a really interesting point that scared me was brought up by Kurtzka Saget in this video. Much of our information is stored on servers. If society collapses and there's power outages, many of these servers will be lost. And you think, no, but Tim, the summation of human knowledge exists on the internet. It does. But do you know where this video is stored? I don't. Very few people probably do. In fact, I can tell you this. The people who made the video don't even know where it's stored. If society were to face an imminent crisis and there were power outages, businesses collapsing, the data centers that hold the servers for much of the content that we read will be shut down. And then we can simply say, yes, the servers are still there, the information's still there, but how do you search them? There are data centers all over the world housing much of this information. Some of it's in China. If war were to break out and a data center in New York shut down, you would simply walk away. Some might then say, I remember Tim Pool did this video where he talked about these important ideas. We need to bring those ideas back up and read and learn from history. And they'll say, yeah, but those are on the old Google servers. That could be anywhere in the country. Google's got data centers all over the place. How do we find which servers we have to turn back on if they're off? I guess we just have to start exploring. And what that means is, depending on how many people die in any kind of major war or collapse, it will be a process to try and seek out lost knowledge. It's remarkable to me when people say stuff like, we can't lose technology. We easily lose technology. I watched this really great video about how we started building skyscrapers to funnel heat effectively so that we can keep the insides cold using less electricity. We have skyscrapers in many big cities, but for a while they couldn't go past 7 or 8 floors. Why? The heat accumulation was too much. It's boiling. You ever go to the top floor of a house in the summer? It's so hot, heat rises. We invented air conditioning, which allows us to capture heat and eject it out of the building, cooling the upper floors. It's funny because in this video, they talked about how there are some native tribes that build their huts and their structures to effectively funnel heat. And how did they figure out how to do this? They looked at anthills. There are ants that did that to evacuate heat from the colony to keep it cool. We've known as humans for a long time how to do this. The technology is lost. And it's funny that it takes hundreds of years to finally be like, oh, we don't need to do air conditioning. We can just build a certain structure a certain way. We'll still need some air conditioning, right? Comfort. My point is simple. If there is a collapse, if there is a war, if there is civil war, you'll be surprised what luxuries today will be gone tomorrow. Because as they point out here, the Romans had indoor plumbing. After the fall of the Roman Empire, most people just dumped their feces in the streets. Isn't that amazing? The castles in medieval times, they had chutes. You would go into the part of the castle and take a dump and it would just fall straight down a hole and then someone would have to shovel and clean it. I guess that technically counts as indoor plumbing. But it is sad to see that when the empire fell and civilization collapsed, knowledge was lost. Interesting days indeed. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.